altitude that he estimated to be about 200 feet. And, take that with a grain of salt because it's very difficult to estimate, distances and things when you're talking about aerial objects. But that was the witness's estimation. And he said that the profile of it was that of a pterosaur. And one of the really interesting details to me was he described this thing as having a long tail with a spade on the end of it. And so he went on to say that the head was sort of indistinguishable because he didn't have a good angle on that part of it, but the wings were really wide and pretty similar to what you would expect, out of a flying pterosaur. And so, it was dark in color, and it flapped its wings pretty slow, and he got a pretty good look at it for about 15 to 20 seconds. And he was positive that it wasn't any sort of crane or heron, saying that he was very familiar with those types of birds, which a lot of people who live up here are going to be, honestly.
That's the right word. They will be.
Yeah. And if I can go back to that tail again, that was the interesting detail to me that really stood out, because when I'm looking at a case and I'm looking for, the possibility of a misidentification or something, I'm looking for unprompted details that, might just indicate that it couldn't possibly be something like some normal species of bird, And so, there's nothing on a crane or a heron or any of these other large migratory birds that do, frankly, when in flight, closely resemble, flying dinosaurs, because they are descended from pterosaurs. But they don't have these tails. And that's really, really interesting to me, So I can't say for sure what this witness saw, but just having that detail and sort of the surety, with which he gave his testimony, I thought lended it a certain air of credibility, certainly. And the nice thing about this too was it was actually popular enough that it led to somebody else coming forward, which is also always, great, because as you and I have talked about this many times, actually. It's difficult for witnesses to come forward with their story. Most of the time they don't know where to report it. They don't think anybody would believe them, even if they did report it. And so when they see an article, like this one about a pterosaur sighting in basically the middle of Illinois, then they see something like that, and it gives them a little extra courage. They say, well, you know what, like, these people are taking it seriously. They didn't make a joke out of this. And now I feel safe. I can go to them, I can tell them my story, which is exactly what happened. Because not much longer after we ran that story, I was contacted by a young woman who said that back in 2017, her and her parents had a pterosaur sighting in Arkansas. And so she had actually contacted me, and she did say specifically that she saw that Wheaton, Illinois article, and that it had prompted her, to come forward, and it prompted her parents to come forward. And so she had contacted me and said that she'd read the article and everything, and talked about how her and her parents were out driving in Arkansas near, what was the name of this state forest? They were just outside of Pine Bluff, which is by, oh boy, I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly. I want to say Wichita National Forest in Arkansas. It's spelled Ouachita, so I think hopefully I'm pretty close. And so they're outside of Pine Bluff, basically between sort of Pine Bluff and this huge national forest. I mean, this national forest, which is already known for its Bigfoot sightings, apparently. It's a good 3,000 square miles of wilderness. So it's massive.
It sounds like it.
Sprawls over, western Arkansas and into eastern Oklahoma. And so they're driving along, and her dad's driving, and as he's driving, he sees something that at first he thinks is a bird, but he'd never seen a bird that long with that kind of wingspan, which he went on later to describe as being like 30 feet across, which is reminiscent of the pterosaur sightings that we had received near Gary, Indiana. And those took place, I believe, in 2015 and 2016. So right around this same time, actually, just before this Arkansas sighting, those Gary, Indiana sightings would have been happening. Anyway, so he describes this thing as having a 30-foot wingspan, and interestingly, also having a tail just like what our Wheaton, Illinois witness said he saw. So, this whole family came forward, and I talked with the daughter. I talked with the father. The mother basically agreed that the father's testimony was accurate, essentially. And so, this was an interesting sighting. And the really weird thing about this is, it's sort of the same issue that I had with the Gary, Indiana sightings, is how do you hide something this big? I mean, they talk about something that it was so big that it cast a shadow, the size of a bus, and where would something like that live? Gary, Indiana, there's no place. Where these guys saw this thing in Arkansas, I mean, maybe that national forest, but you got to think too. So you've got this thing with a 30-foot wingspan or something, and 3,000 square miles of forest, like that's a lot of forest. But to have, say, like, let's just speculate and say that this was a physical animal, to have a breeding population big enough to sustain these things. I mean, you'd think people would be seeing them all the time, and they're not really. We get a handful specifically of these pterosaur reports, every year, but like they're weird enough when people see them that you would think if they were being seen as often as, say, a normal large migratory bird or something, that they would just be reported, much more frequently, and you would think that they would be seen more if there were these breeding populations that represented an actual ecology of pterosaurs living somewhere.
I would think so. Yeah, my feeling is, now maybe because I do too many UFO and alien things on my show, maybe these creatures can go in and out of portals and stuff like that. So they're going back from time into the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, and it's definitely something that we've talked about before. I wouldn't be against the idea necessarily that, somehow through some not yet understood mechanism, that people are somehow seeing something from another time, maybe, or a parallel universe. There could be another universe where, these things didn't die out, and so one of the other issues that we encounter here is as paleontology sort of updates what we think of as the appearance of pterosaurs. That is to say, what we think that they would have looked like way back when. As that's updated, that doesn't always match what witnesses are reporting necessarily, So, although that's also sort of, there's been a lot of fluctuation there as far as what, scientists think pterosaurs and other and related things like dinosaurs used to look like. That seems to change pretty frequently as, new evidence is introduced and people change their opinions and everything. But one thing that really hasn't changed is what these witnesses say they're seeing, their sightings don't change to match the latest information from paleontologists or anything. And so really what they're consistently describing is, these large, featherless, usually dark-colored, sometimes sort of leathery-looking pterosaurs with these, huge membranous wings, which is sort of, often they'll have crests on the back of their head, long, thinnish, beaks, and then those tails, like these last two reports described, and that's pretty consistent. And so that's always been really interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Is it that they're being informed by sort of this classic model of what everybody was always told when we were kids of what, pterodactyls were supposed to look like and what they looked like in cartoons and in movies and stuff? Or, is it just that, literally this is what they're seeing and for whatever reason, this is what they're consistently seeing. And, their opinion of it isn't changing with their perspective isn't changing with the opinion of paleontologists. Is it that what they're reporting is what they're really seeing? Because if they were being influenced sort of by the, pop culture and opinions of paleontologists and sort of the evolution of what, things like pterosaurs are supposed to look like, then you would expect their descriptions to have changed. But they really haven't changed, honestly. Not ever that I've seen. So I guess I guess that there's two ways to look at that, if that makes sense.
Well, what got me when you were talking about the wingspan, that's probably one of the biggest reports I've heard for a wingspan on them. Normally it's like 10, 15 feet. This thing is huge. That's huge enough to, if a person was walking and it looked like they were a good meal, they could just pick a person up and they would be gone.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. And normally we're looking at, somewhere in sort of in what you described, like somewhere between, maybe 10 to 15 feet as far as what people report for wingspan. Although I'll tell you, to go back to those Gary sightings, let me see if I can pull one up here real quick. They actually had a very similar wingspan. So when I talked to because those Gary sightings, it was a husband and a wife, and they actually saw them independently. They saw them at separate times from each other. And when I talked to the husband, he actually said that he estimated the wingspan of what he saw at about 40 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, which is, that's huge. And so, that's comparable.